There are moments on that stage, under the heat of the lights, when you can physically see a person's world tilt on its axis. It's not about the cameras or the audience, it's a quiet internal cataclysm where the story they've told themselves for 10, 20, 40 years just shatters. I've seen it 1,000 times, but it never gets old. And with Susan, the sound of that breaking was deafening. She walked out with this polished, almost brittle confidence, a woman who had her narrative down cold. It was a tragic story, a trilogy of heartbreak, and she was the long-suffering heroine at the center of it all. 3 failed marriages, 3 men who, according to her, were a trifecta of dysfunction. One was a narcissist, the next a gaslighting manipulator, and the third an emotionally unavailable workaholic. She had all the buzzwords, all the pop psychology labels that people use to build walls around their own accountability. I had her file on my desk for weeks before the show. It was thick, not just with her own detailed novelistic accounts, but with reports from my producers, interviews with the ex-husbands, with her sister, with her 2 adult children. And as I read, a pattern emerged that was so clear, so textbook, it was practically screaming from the pages. The problem wasn't that Susan was a bad person, she wasn't malicious. The problem was that she was the star, director, and screenwriter of a movie where she was always the victim, always. And when you're the perpetual victim, you have no power, you have no agency, and you have no responsibility. It's a passive role, but it has a huge payoff. You never have to look in the mirror and ask the toughest question of all, what's my part in this? When she sat in the chair across from me, she was perfectly composed, dressed impeccably. She spoke with a kind of rehearsed eloquence, hitting all the emotional beats she thought would win me and the audience over to her side. She talked about the loneliness, the betrayal, the confusion. I just don't understand, Dr. Phil, she said, her voice catching just so. I'm a good person. I'm a loving partner. Why do I keep attracting these broken men? And right there, that was the tell, the language attracting, as if these men were mosquitoes drawn to a porch light and she was just an innocent, passive source of illumination. It's a clever piece of psychological jujitsu. It frames the problem as an external force acting upon you rather than a series of choices you are actively making. I let her talk. I let her lay out the whole story of husband number 1, the supposed narcissist. She described his selfishness, his need for admiration, how he never saw her for who she was. Then she moved on to husband number 2, the master manipulator. He twisted her words, made her feel crazy. Finally, husband number 3, the man who was married to his job, leaving her emotionally abandoned. It was a compelling narrative. If you only heard her side, you'd think she was the unluckiest woman in the world. But I had the file. I had the other sides of the story. And the stories, while different in their details, all had a common theme. They all described a woman who demanded constant, unconditional adoration at the beginning of the relationship, but who would inevitably turn cold and critical. A woman who saw any independent thought or differing opinion as a personal betrayal. A woman who kept a meticulous record of wrongs, who could weaponize a thoughtless comment from 3 years prior with surgical precision. They described a world where every disagreement was a catastrophic battle for emotional survival, and she was always the one who was wounded, always the one who needed to be rescued. I listened, I nodded, but what I was really doing was observing. I was watching her body language, listening to her syntax. She wasn't just telling a story, she was defending a fortress. And I knew that to get to the truth, I wasn't going to be able to just knock on the door. I was going to have to take a battering ram to the gate. Because inside that fortress was the one person she was most terrified of confronting, her authentic self. The first step in dismantling a fortress is to find the hairline cracks in the foundation. For Susan, that foundation was the story that she was simply unlucky in love. So I started there. Susan, I said, leaning forward a bit, let's just step back from the details of these three men for a second. Let's talk about patterns. One bad relationship, that's a mistake, a learning experience. Two, that's a coincidence, maybe some bad judgment. But three in a row with you as the common denominator? That's not bad luck, Susan. That's a pattern. And patterns don't just happen to you, they happen through you. You are an active participant in creating this result, whether you know it or not. You could see the shift in her posture, her shoulders tightened, her pleasant, pained expression hardened just a fraction. This wasn't part of her script. Her script was about her ex-husband's flaws. I wasn't playing my part. I was supposed to validate her, to condemn them. Instead, I was turning the camera around. My ex-husbands were the problem, she stated flatly. A defensive wall going up. You didn't live with them. You don't know what it was like. No, I didn't. I agreed. But I've read every word they said. I've read what your sister said. I've read what your own children said. And while the details differ, the music is the same. And the music is about a woman who has an unfillable hole inside her and expects her partner to pour his entire existence into it, and when he can't, because no human being can, he becomes the enemy. That's when I took her back. Back before the husbands. Back before the dating. I asked her about her childhood. At first, she gave me the sanitized version. Oh, it was fine, normal, my parents loved me, but I know fine and normal are often code words for things we've decided not to examine too closely. I started asking specific questions. Tell me about your father, Susan. What was it like trying to get his approval? Her eyes flickered. A genuine, unguarded emotion for the first time. My father, he was a good man, a provider, but he was critical. Nothing was ever quite good enough. I'd bring home a report card with 5 A's and 1 B, and he'd ask what happened with the B. And what did you do, I asked. How did you react to that? I tried harder, she said, her voice small. I became a perfectionist. I became the student council president, the head cheerleader, got a scholarship to a great college. I thought, if I just achieved enough, if I was perfect enough, then he would finally give me that validation, that unconditional, I'm proud of you no matter what. And did you ever get it? She shook her head, a slow, sad motion. A tear finally escaped and tracked down her perfectly applied makeup. No, not really. So you learned a very dangerous lesson as a little girl, I explained, connecting the dots for her. You learned that love is conditional. You learned that it has to be earned through performance. And you learned that even when you perform perfectly, the goalpost can still be moved and the validation can still be withheld. So what does a person do with that? In your adult relationships, you flipped the script. You went into those marriages with a massive emotional deficit, and you made your husbands responsible for healing that wound from your father. You didn't want a partner, you wanted a worshiper. You wanted a man who would finally give you the unconditional 24/7 adoration your father never did. The moment husband number one had a bad day at work and wasn't focused entirely on you, it didn't just feel like a bad day. To you, it felt like your father asking about the B on your report card. It felt like a fundamental withdrawal of love. She was crying now, but she was also listening. The fortress walls were starting to crumble, not because of a battering ram, but because she was beginning to see that she had built them herself, brick by painful brick, based on a blueprint drawn in her childhood. I then turned to her mother. Her mother, it turned out, was a classic martyr, A woman who sacrificed everything for her family, but made sure everyone knew it. She communicated through sighs, through passive aggression, through a constant narrative of her own suffering. And from her mother, Susan learned another terrible lesson, that the victim holds the moral high ground. The one who is wronged, the one who suffers in silence or not so silence, is the one who is righteous. So here was the whole picture. From her father, she got an insatiable need for external validation. From her mother, she got the playbook for how to control others and garner sympathy. When that validation wasn't forthcoming, become the martyr. It was a toxic cocktail of learned behaviors that made a healthy, reciprocal partnership virtually impossible. She was pre-programmed for disappointment because no real-world man could ever live up to the fantasy role she had cast for him, the role of the perfect father who would finally make her feel whole. This is the critical turning point. It's where the insight moves from being a historical fact about a sad little girl to a present-day reality about a destructive adult. The tears she was crying were for the child who couldn't get her father's approval. Now, she had to face the tears she caused as a woman who demanded that same impossible approval from her husbands. Let's put this into practice, Susan. I said, my voice softening because I knew this was the hardest part. Let's talk about Mark, your first husband. The one you called a narcissist. You described the beginning of your relationship as magical, a whirlwind. Why was that? What was he doing that made it so perfect? She thought for a moment, wiping her eyes. He saw me. He adored me. He sent flowers. He wrote poems. He told me I was the most amazing woman he'd ever met. He was completely focused on me. He was filling the hole, wasn't he? I said gently, he was giving you 100% of the validation you'd been starving for your entire life. For a little while, he was the perfect father you never had. But Susan, that's not a relationship. That's an intensive care unit for a wounded ego. And it's not sustainable. What happened 6 months in? What was the first big fight about? I already knew the answer. It was in the notes. She hesitated, and I could see her mind racing, trying to fit the old narrative over this new, uncomfortable truth. He started pulling away. He wanted to have a poker night with his friends every Thursday. He said he needed his own space. And how did you interpret that? I pressed. What did that feel like to you? Like a rejection? She admitted. Like I wasn't enough for him anymore. If he truly loved me, he would want to be with me, not with his loud, obnoxious friends. So you told him that? Yes. I told him it hurt my feelings. I cried. I said he was being selfish. You went right to the martyr playbook you learned from your mother, I pointed out. You made his perfectly normal need for social interaction outside the marriage into a referendum on his love for you. You made him feel guilty. What did he do? He got defensive, she said. He said I was being controlling and insecure because he was right. I said flatly, but not unkindly, he was trying to establish a normal boundary, and you treated it as an act of war. So what happened next? He probably gave in a few times to keep the peace, right? Skipped his poker night? She nodded. Yes, for a while. But the demand never stopped, did it? It wasn't just poker night. It was him wanting to watch a football game instead of a movie with you. It was him taking a phone call from his brother during dinner. Every single instance of him having a separate identity, a separate thought, a separate need, was processed by your childhood wound as, I'm not perfect enough. He's withdrawing his love. So you criticized, you complained. You kept an inventory of all his selfish acts. You made the emotional price of his independence so high that he started to withdraw for real. Not because he didn't love you, but because he couldn't breathe. He was drowning in your neediness. And when he finally pulled away to save himself, you put a label on him, narcissist, because it was easier to diagnose him as broken than to admit that you had suffocated him. The silence in the studio was absolute. She wasn't crying anymore. She was just staring, her face a mask of dawning horror. I had taken her hero-victim story and recast her as the antagonist. I did the same for the next 2 marriages. With husband number 2, the gaslighter, the dynamic was identical. He got a big promotion that required more travel. She didn't see it as a success for them as a couple. She saw it as his deliberate choice to abandon her. When she accused him of not caring, he tried to reason with her to explain the pressures he was under. "Susan, that's not what's happening," he would say, and she would reply, "See, you're twisting my words. You're making me feel crazy." She wasn't being gaslit. She was refusing to accept a reality that didn't revolve 100% around her emotional needs. And with the third husband, the workaholic, it was the most tragic of all. He was an entrepreneur, trying to build a business to give them a secure future. He worked long hours, and every day she met him at the door, not with support, but with an accounting of her loneliness. She made his ambition her enemy. She made his efforts to provide for them a weapon to use against him. Each time, the pattern was the same. An initial phase of intense adoration followed by the inevitable return to real-life balance. That balance was perceived by Susan as a withdrawal of love, triggering her deepest childhood fears. She would then deploy her mother's strategy of martyrdom and criticism to pull him back. The man, feeling controlled and unappreciated, would inevitably pull away further. This confirmed her narrative. The self-fulfilling prophecy was complete, and she could declare the marriage a failure, adding another chapter to her tragic story with a new villain and the same. Blameless victim. Her own children had confirmed it. Her son told my producers, "We love our mom, but living with her was like being a character in her play. If you went off script, you were punished with silence or guilt. We all just learned to play our parts. Now we get to the core of it, the confrontation. This isn't about shaming her or making her feel worse. It's about breaking a cycle that has defined her entire adult life. Insight is step 1. But insight without action is just a nice story you tell yourself at a dinner party. The breakthrough has to be visceral. It has to hurt a little. "Susan," I said, my tone shifting from analytical to direct. "This is not about your father anymore. He's a part of your history, not a life sentence. This is not about your mother. Her playbook doesn't have to be yours. This is about you. Right here, right now. At some point, you traded authenticity for approval. You decided it was safer to be a victim than to be vulnerable, to be a martyr than to be a partner. And you've been paying the price ever since, dragging 3 men and your own children through the wreckage with you." Her defenses flared one last time. It's a predictable response, the ego fighting for its life. "That's not fair," she shot back, her voice laced with the old, familiar indignation. "You're making it sound like everything was my fault. They weren't perfect. Mark was selfish. David did twist my words sometimes. Paul was gone all the time." "Stop," I said, holding up a hand. "Just stop it. This is the moment, right here. This is the choice point. Are you going to go back to that blame-shifting narrative? Are you going to sit here and tell me that your behavior was just a reaction to their imperfections? Because I will tell you right now, every human being on this planet is imperfect. If you are waiting for a perfect partner who will never trigger your insecurities, who will spend every waking moment catering to your emotional needs and healing your childhood wounds, you will die alone. Is that what you want? The question hung in the air. It was brutal, but it had to be. Sugarcoating it would be malpractice. You have been operating a covert contract in every one of your relationships, I continued. The terms are this: I will give you my love, and in exchange, you will make me feel whole. You will never have needs that conflict with mine. You will never have a bad day. You will anticipate my every insecurity and soothe it before I even have to ask. You will be the father I never had. And if you violate any of these terms, the contract is void, and I will label you as defective and discard you. Does that sound like a fair deal to you, Susan? Would you sign that contract? She stared at me, her mouth slightly open. The fight was gone. The indignation had been replaced by a look of profound, gut-wrenching recognition. This wasn't me telling her something she didn't know. It was me saying out loud the things she had always known deep down, but had never dared to voice. It was the monster in her basement, and I had just dragged it into the light. You're not a victim, Susan, I said, my voice softer now. You're a volunteer. You have volunteered for this pain again and again by choosing a broken strategy. The strategy of using another person as a solution to your own internal problems. Your husbands weren't the problem. Your loneliness is the problem. Your feeling of inadequacy is the problem. And you've been outsourcing the solution. It doesn't work. It will never work. I let that sink in. I could see the wheels turning. I could see her replaying dozens, hundreds of arguments in her head, but this time through a new lens. She wasn't seeing her ex-husband's selfishness. She was seeing her own unreasonable demand. She wasn't seeing his gaslighting. She was seeing her refusal to accept his perspective. She wasn't seeing his emotional distance. She was seeing how she had pushed him away with her incessant criticism. The entire library of her personal history was being recatalogued in real time. So what do I do? She whispered. It was the first time she had asked a question that wasn't a rhetorical defense of her own position. It was the first genuinely curious, genuinely open question she had asked all day. It was the sound of a breakthrough. You start by making a new contract, I told her. But this one is with yourself. The terms are this: I, Susan, am 100% responsible for my own happiness. I am responsible for healing the wounds of my childhood. I will not make another human being the custodian of my self-esteem. You have to learn to sit with your own discomfort. The next time you feel that pang of loneliness or insecurity, instead of reaching for the phone to blame a man, you need to turn inward and ask, what is this feeling really about? What does the little girl inside me need to hear from me, the adult, right now? You have to learn to parent yourself. You have to give yourself the validation you're trying to extract from everyone else. I explained that this wasn't an overnight fix. This was hard work. It meant therapy. It meant journaling. It meant learning to set and respect boundaries. It meant, for the first time in her life, building a relationship with herself that was so strong, so nourishing, that a partner became a wonderful addition, not a desperate necessity. It meant grieving the fantasy of the perfect man who would rescue her and embracing the reality of being her own rescuer. The outcome of a show like this is never really decided on the stage. The stage is just where you plant the seed. Whether or not it grows is up to the person when they walk out of the studio and back into their life. For Susan, the immediate aftermath was quiet. She didn't have a big, tearful Hollywood catharsis. Instead, she seemed almost stunned, absorbing the weight of the new reality she had to carry. That's often a good sign. The big emotional explosions can sometimes be just that, a release of pressure that changes nothing. A quiet, contemplative shock, that's the look of a paradigm shift. We set her up with a therapist in her hometown. someone who specialized in attachment theory and family systems. That was non-negotiable. I told her point blank, the insights you gain today are worthless if you don't put a plan in place to operationalize them. Otherwise, your old habits will creep back in the moment you feel stressed or lonely, and you'll be right back where you started. She agreed. There was a humility to her that hadn't been there an hour before. The brittle confidence was gone, replaced by something softer, more uncertain, but infinitely more real. The first few follow-up calls from my team were tentative. Her producer told me she was struggling. It's one thing to understand your patterns intellectually in a controlled environment. It's another thing entirely to live differently day to day. She admitted that her first instinct, whenever she felt a twinge of anxiety, was to think about what one of her ex-husbands had done to cause it. The neural pathways of blame were deep and well worn. She was having to consciously and with great effort forge new ones. She was doing the work, but it was like learning to write with her opposite hand. It was clumsy, frustrating, and slow. One of the most powerful steps she took was something I suggested but never knew if she'd actually do. She wrote 3 letters, one to each of her ex-husbands. These letters were not for them, they were for her. It was an exercise in accountability. In the first draft, she told her therapist, the letters still had traces of blame. I'm sorry for my part, but you have to admit you were difficult when you... Her therapist made her rewrite them. The final versions were radically different. They were clean. They were simple acknowledgments of her role in the breakdown of the marriages. She took ownership of her unreasonable expectations, her neediness, and her critical nature. She never sent the letters. That wasn't the point. The point was to change the narrative in her own head to fully and completely accept her 100% of the 50% of the dynamic that was hers. The real breakthrough came about 6 months later. It wasn't with a new man, it was with her son David. He called her one evening to say he couldn't make their weekly Sunday dinner because his wife was sick. The old Susan would have launched into a full-scale martyr performance. The sighs, the guilt trip. Oh, of course. Don't worry about your lonely old mother. It's fine. I'll just eat by myself. I hope she feels better. It would have been a masterclass in passive aggression, designed to make him feel terrible and ensure he never canceled again. But this new Susan did something different. She took a breath. She recognized the familiar pang of disappointment in her chest. She acknowledged it. And then she responded to her son. Oh, honey, of course. Don't worry about it at all. Give Sarah my love, and I hope she feels better soon. We'll do it next week. You take care of your wife. David, according to what he later told my producer, was so shocked he was silent for a few seconds. He kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, but it never did. It was a simple, clean, loving interaction. For Susan, it was a bigger victory than any romantic gesture could ever be. She had faced her trigger, the feeling of being set aside, of not being the number one priority, and she had chosen a healthy response. She had parented herself through the moment instead of making her son manage her emotions. She told her therapist it was the first time she felt truly free. She hadn't needed him to fix her feeling of disappointment. She had handled it herself. She didn't start dating again for over a year. She spent that time building a life she actually enjoyed on her own. She reconnected with old friends she'd pushed away because her husbands hadn't liked them. She took up painting, something she'd loved in college but had abandoned because she didn't have time. She was, for the first time, filling her own cup. When she did eventually meet someone, it was different. She told us she wasn't looking for a savior or an admirer. She was looking for a friend, a true partner. The man she's with now is, by her own account, imperfect. He's a good man, but he's just a man. He has his own interests, his own friends, his own bad days, and she's okay with that because her happiness is no longer his job, it's hers. And she's finally, after all these years, doing a damn good job of it. It's not a Hollywood ending with a ride off into the sunset. It's better, it's real. It's the story of a woman who stopped blaming everyone else for the trilogy of her failed life and finally decided to write a new book with a new author herself.